Hey guys, I'm Tom on Tech Chat, and this is the ROG Li-X. It runs faster, it has a longer battery life, it's cooler and quieter, it's more refined, but it's also a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier, it's more expensive, and of course it still runs Windows 11. So you may have seen some unboxings and first looks at this, but this is my full review, benchmarks and battery life and all that good stuff, and also I'll be comparing it to the OG Li and some of its rivals. Although, make sure you do stick around and subscribe because I will have a full handheld gaming buying guide coming very soon with, well, all these guys. It's going to be a big one. So last year, they introduced the first gen Ally, and I liked it a lot, I really did. But battery life was pretty rubbish, there were lots of niggling issues with Windows and the Armoury Crate software, the 512 gigs of storage felt pretty tight, and obviously we had issues around the SD cards, although that was quickly fixed. It was good, if perhaps falling short of great, but it was first gen. So here we are with the Ally-X, which is more of a midlife refresh, an Ally 1.5 rather than a 2.0 if you will. Kind of like the Steam Deck OLED to the original deck. And there is only one Ally-X instead of the two models that we had with the OG Ally. Now I must admit, when I first got my hands on this and I saw the spec sheet, I was a little bit disappointed that there was no change to the screen or the processor, two pretty fundamental aspects of a gaming handheld. The X shares the same 7-inch 1080p 120Hz VRR IPS display and the same Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor as the highest spec original Ally, no sign of any next-gen processors. But pretty much everything else has been upgraded, with the most important one by far being the battery. They have doubled the size from 40 watt-hours to 80. It does mean it's a little bit thicker and heavier, we'll talk about the design in a second, but they've doubled the battery, which makes it by far the biggest battery in terms of gaming handhelds, and it addresses the biggest issue I think most of us had with the original Ally. Does it mean we get double the battery? Yes, in some situations, but we'll come to all the performance benchmarks in a second. Plus, you can increase the power limit for a higher FPS and still get a better battery life overall. It's a genuine game changer, or should I say game lengthener. They've also doubled the storage. We now have 1 terabyte built in here, plus of course you can expand it via micro SD, and the internal SSD is now a standard size 2280 PCIe 4 M2 drive. So you have way more and a lot cheaper upgrade options, including up to 8 terabytes. There's also extra RAM, 24 gigabytes of the stuff, up from 16, which is also about 16% faster. Plus there's a new USB 4 Type-C port for fast transfers, for connecting to external monitors, and of course for external graphics cards. Although that is still a very expensive option, and you will have a lot of bottlenecks here, but it is more practical than the old XG mobile port that I'm pretty sure no one really used. Plus the front-firing speakers are louder, charging is up from 65 watts to 100 watts, although you'll need a 100-watt compatible charger, and new fans improve the airflow and make the Ally-X up to 24% quieter. As for the design, well, again, it's an evolution of the original Ally, very familiar, but a few tweaks and refinements. I do like this new stealth black look. It's definitely going to get less grubby than the original white Ally. Would have been nice if it came in both options. They are still selling this, by the way. You don't have to go for the new Ally-X because it is a bit more expensive. Although, at the same time, it does now look a bit anonymous amongst the other chunky black rectangular handhelds. I mean, holding them side by side, the X does feel a little bit chunkier and slightly heavier, but you can't really tell unless you are holding them like this. It doesn't change how portable this is. And certainly next to the Legion Go, it is still pretty compact. The grips are comfortable, but still a bit shallow, so your hold isn't as secure as on some of the others. Also, the two Aura RGB thumbsticks now have a more weighted, more resistive feel, which helps gauge your movements more accurately, and there's a sort of narrower but deeper indent with a thicker textured edge grip, which does keep your thumb a little bit more securely centered. And apparently they're now rated for 5 million use cycles, up from 2 million on the old one. There's also just way more feedback from the face buttons, thanks to a longer travel. You really do feel the click now, and also the matte finish on the D-pad makes it grippier than the glossy one from before. And the triggers are a bit chunkier and easier to use as well. Altogether then, a nice refinement. It does feel and look a bit more premium than before, although still no touchpad, which I know a lot of people do love, especially for games that work well with a mouse, something we do get on the Steam Deck OLED and the Legion Go. The headphone jack and also the previously troublesome microSD card reader have swapped to the right-hand side, plus there's the double USB-Cs. One is the faster USB 4, and the other is a slightly slower USB 3.2 Gen 2. Like all handhelds though, it is still, plasticky and not the most premium thing in the whole world. But let's talk about battery life, because that is by far the biggest reason to pick up an Ally X. Because a bigger battery gives you options. You can either play your games for longer, but it's also the ability to dial up to 25 watts turbo mode or even a higher custom setting and not worry that it's going to be all out of juice in under an hour. So the power presets give a target TDP, for example the 17 watt performance mode on the X. But once you factor in all the other system power draws, it's actually running at over 30 watts, and the top-end 30 watt turbo mode actually draws over 40 watts. And with the 40 watt hour battery in the old Ally, that meant maybe an hour of gaming at most. So the big question is, how much longer does this last? Well, I fired up F123 because for some reason F124 didn't actually work initially on this, although I'm sure we'll get updates soon, and running at 720p with 50% brightness and using the more frugal but still very capable 17 watt performance mode, the Ally X lasted a full 3 hours, which is over twice as long as the original Ally, even though that was using a lower 15 watt TDP mode. The Steam Deck OLED lasted 2 hours 15, the MSI Claw 2 hours, and the Legion Go from Lenovo lasted an hour 45, so the Ally X is way out ahead. And if you're playing in the 13 watt silent mode in less demanding games, you can easily get 4 to 5 hours. And setting the FPS limiter to 30, 45, or 60 FPS is a great way to extend the battery life. So big thumbs up for the battery life, well done ASUS. But let's talk about this screen, which shouldn't take too long because, as I say, it's exactly the same as the original Ally, 7 inches, full HD 16:9 display. And the jump in image clarity playing at 1080p versus the 800p on the Steam Deck is quite significant, it's noticeably sharper. That said, the step up to 1600p on the Legion Go feels like an even bigger jump, although you can only get playable frame rates at that resolution in much less demanding games. Also, maxing out the 120Hz display can be a bit tricky with this processor running high-end games, but again, if you're running simpler games like Minecraft, then if you can play at 1080p and get 120Hz, it looks amazing. And like before, one of the big selling points of the Ally is it's the only mainstream handheld to have VRR, or a variable refresh rate. Especially demanding games, which have more fluctuating frame rates, feel a lot smoother to play. And it means you don't have to lock your frame rate to 30 or 60 to get a more consistent experience. Although for an IPS level screen, the viewing angles aren't particularly great. Nothing like as good as the Steam Deck OLED screen. Would I have liked an OLED screen? Yes. Would I have taken OLED and given up VRR? That's a tougher one. And the 500 nits of brightness is fine, although it would have been nice to go a little bit higher for gaming outdoors. While nothing's really changed here in terms of the screen, and the competitors do offer different advantages, like the Legion Go is 144Hz and high resolution, whereas the Steam Deck is OLED, I think this combination of 1080p, this size, having VRR is still a very nice option. And I suspect ASUS are holding some upgrades back for a possible Ally 2 next year. Okay, so as I fire up Cyberpunk here, let's talk about the performance, because as I say, this is using the same Z1 Extreme chip as the higher end model of the original Ally. No new Ryzen architecture here, unfortunately. I think maybe we'll see that on the next gen version. So in terms of the processor, we shouldn't be seeing much improvement in performance, but we do have more and faster RAM, which should translate to a slightly improved performance, or at least a smoother performance overall. In the ARM Recreate menu, you have 3 power presets. You've got the 13 watt silent, 17 watt performance, and the 25 watt turbo, although this jumps to 30 watts when it's plugged in. And there's also custom modes for tweaking. Now in Cyberpunk, using the Steam Deck preset running at 720p, I got around 21 FPS using the 13 watt mode, 35 FPS at 17 watts, and a 45 FPS average at 25 watt turbo. So the turbo mode is definitely the sweet spot for playing more demanding games like this. And I think with that bigger battery, I do feel more comfortable running and playing at this, knowing that I'm going to get, a couple of hours of battery rather than under an hour. And that's a big deal. It's kind of the whole point of this Ally X, because it's changed my relationship with the performance of the handheld completely. Playing games like this at these settings with this wattage on any other handheld feels like you're asking to kill the battery life. And the bump up to 24 gigs of faster RAM and some other optimizations gives us a boost of around 1 to 5% in most games. It's not significant, although there were some outliers, but this is more about the original Ally being slow. In most games I tested though, the Ally X is appreciably faster than the Steam Deck OLED, and like the other Windows handhelds, lets you take advantage of the high resolution and the higher refresh rates. Oh, and just a quick mention of AMD's FSR 3.1, which is a pretty big deal for Handheld, because with this latest version of their upscaling tech, it also now includes frame generation, meaning extra AI-generated frames to improve your FPS, but without being more demanding for the hardware. It's kind of like a free performance upgrade, and I hope more games will implement it soon. And remember, you can always use your Handheld for streaming games from the likes of GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming, or even streaming from your PlayStation, although you will need a fast and reliable internet connection.
We hauled ass out through the kitchen. Wouldn't be here otherwise.
I must admit, I'm also quite impressed by the speakers. They are definitely louder and punchier than the original Ally. I'd still recommend a pair of headphones though, and sometimes I've noticed when the frame rate can still get a bit choppy, the sound can also stutter a little bit. But with all that said, as nice as this is, and with all the refinements, it is still a Windows 11 based handheld, which of course they all are, except for the Steam Deck, and it's a bit of a love-hate relationship. I mean, it's got a little bit better. There are slightly fewer bugs than when the first generation of these handhelds came out a year or so ago, but it's still a full-fat Windows 11 PC running with ASUS's ROG Armoury Crate software on top. And while on the plus side, of course, it gives you access to all the game libraries, not just Steam, it does also mean you're going to get crashes and bugs, and you're going to have to fiddle around with the silly little Windows keyboard and things like that. Luckily, the Armoury Crate UI boots up after login and also gets its own dedicated shortcut button. So most of the time you'll be in here or one of the other game libraries, and hopefully avoiding the Windows desktop. The good news though is that it is only getting better over time. There was quite a big update for the Armoury Crate, which launched with the Ally X and also came to the original Ally, so it's good to see them supporting both devices. Sometimes you'll be using this and want to pull your hair out and be like, why has it done that? Has it crashed? And you have to sort of go down to the home start menu and long press on an icon and go back to it because it's running in the background, but gone to a black screen. So I have to, let's do it now. Go back to that. It is frustrating sometimes, but that's a Windows issue, really. And ASUS, like the other companies with the other handhelds, have done their best to make the UI on top and everything else they can possibly do to make this the most streamlined experience possible. And most of the time, it works fine. We do have to talk about SD card gate, though. The controversy around SD cards essentially not quite melting, but being destroyed in the original Ally. It didn't happen to everyone, but there were enough cases that it became a bit of a issue. Now, I've spoken to ASUS directly about this, their internal technical marketing team, and I've been told that a few units of the original Ally, there was an issue with the circuitry, not ideal. Now, this was rectified, I was told, a few months after launch, fairly quickly, and so this is no longer a current issue with Allies, and so I'm pretty confident that it's not going to be an issue with the Ally X either. The screen did get pretty hot though. I measured around 42 degrees Celsius after a few minutes using it in 25-watt turbo mode, and it's hotter than I'd like, although most of the time you're not really using the screen, so it's not the end of the world. So that is the ROG Ally X, and for me this is by far the most complete Windows gaming handheld you can buy. Mostly because of that bigger battery, but it is just a nice refinement all round. But it is also $800. It's quite a lot of money, and fundamentally, yes, while it will last a little bit longer and it's a bit nicer to use and a bit cooler and a bit quieter and easy to upgrade the storage, it's not fundamentally different from the original Ally. And I think for most people, still, the Steam Deck is probably the better option, mostly just down to the software. It's also a bit cheaper. I do kind of like this less glossy OLED screen. Either way, if you do buy yourself an Ally X, you're going to have a great time, and I will do a full comparison, a full roundup of all the options in my big buying guide video, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button. If you've got any questions about the Ally X, drop a comment below, let me know what you make of this. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat. And it's frozen. Can't do anything. Great.